Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week our guest is columnist and U.S. national editor at the Financial Times, Ed Luce. Now remember, we love taking your questions, so write into politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. We'll get to as many as we can, but don't forget to tell us where you're from. Please check out the links to our sponsors, Miracle Made, ExpressVPN, and Beam in our show notes. We thank you for supporting these sponsors. It really helps make this podcast happen. Please tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hey, James, you wrote a much discussed and much cited New York Times column a couple of days ago saying Biden going to get out and setting up or recommending a process to pick the best successor. I agreed then that Biden had to bow out. Now I'm less sure. He's digging in with the understandable but misplaced support from groups like the Congressional Black Caucus and flawed polls like the Bloomberg Morning Consult survey, which shows Biden winning Michigan by 5 and losing Pennsylvania by 7. That 12-point gap is really impossible. I think we agree on this, based on looking at some polls, the Cook Political Report, which has moved a number of states in a direction more towards Trump now, talking to a few politicians and mainly on political instinct, I am convinced, sadly, really sadly, that Biden almost certainly would lose to Trump and probably take down the Senate and House with him. That would be a disaster for America. Unless he follows your dictates or your suggestions, James.
Well, first of all, I think he's going to drop out. I mean, just yesterday, while everybody was reporting that he had a good day, Michael Bennet might be a friend of mine, might be one of the most deliberate people in all of American politics, joined Senator Patty Murray. And then coming in was former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. The Cook Political Report moved 6 states all away from Democrats. And Amy Walter texted me. They don't do this lightly. They didn't fall out and got a bet on the wrong side. You have a Pew poll that shows that young voters are more likely to identify as Republican and Democrat. I would remind people we carried that demographic by 24. That's right, 24 points in 2020. The Manhattan Borough president, a gentleman by the name of Veen, says that he thinks New York is now a swing state. That's all fact. We're going to lose a country. We're going to lose a generation. We're going to lose everything. But I think at the end of the day, he's going to conclude that he just can't go through with this. I mean, what happened yesterday was not a good day for Joe Biden.
I would add to your list Mikey Sherrill, a congresswoman from New Jersey, who I think was the real star, one of the real stars of that class of 2018, may well be the next governor of New Jersey. A really, really impressive member. She also called on Biden to get out. Look, the clock's running.
Pat Ryan from New York 18.
Yeah. Who's in a very competitive race. If journalists would talk to more people in competitive races, I think a lot of them are kind of keeping their powder dry. I am told reliably that the overwhelming majority of Democrats, particularly challengers in competitive races, want Joe Biden to drop out. That's really politically more important than the Black or Hispanic caucus, because they're almost all representing safe districts. So if you want to keep control of the Senate, if you want to take control of the House, you're in real trouble with Biden at the top of the ticket. I think we reached the point, James, where it really Jeffries, Schumer, maybe Pelosi and Obama, have to just put it to him. And I read these parallels to Nixon in 74 and Barry Goldwater going to the White House. That's actually been exaggerated. He had been voted a bill of impeachment by the House Judiciary Committee. Nixon knew he was doomed, and that August 7th meeting was just putting icing on that. Biden is surrounded by adoring family members and a staff of high-level employees. I don't know if anyone's telling him that, and I don't think he knows it. It just, that's what worries me. And I hear some of the defenders on television and elsewhere saying, "Hey, he's spoken, he's going to stay, so let's rally around him." If he's a nominee, James, it's an easy choice. I'll vote for him. But to rally behind what is likely a lost cause in November with catastrophic consequences, I mean, that's just stupid.
I agree. And I still think that the way that they are, I'm sure that the internal lawyers and stuff are trying to figure out there's going to be legal ramifications that, what happens to the money, what happens to the delegates, what happens to the ballots being printed. He's gotten the party and the country in a unnecessary difficult spot. It's just the whole goddamn thing is a tragedy, a first-class tragedy. And it don't get, they can rally some troops. They're not getting any new troops, and the flanks are peeling off already, and it's going to happen.
Yeah, and James, I sure hope it does, and I think if you should bow out, even with your process, I think the prohibitive favorite for the nomination is going to be Kamala Harris. Now, she ran a lousy campaign in 2019, had a couple rocky years as vice president. She seems to have gotten better. Not a big deal, but she had a great photo shoot with Steph Curry and LeBron James and the U.S. Olympic basketball team yesterday. And with a better political team and a good running mate, she would have a chance. That's different, I think, than Biden. And a simple question for those wavering politicians. There's a second presidential debate slated for September 10. Who would you rather have taking on Donald Trump? Joe Biden or Kamala Harris?
I'm going to be running around very shortly.
Well, the captain's talking, so we just have to pause for a second. I think he's done. Okay. Who would I rather have, Harris or Biden? Clearly, I'd rather have Harris. And there are reports of her growth, that she's gotten better, and we may have no other choice than to hope that she's better, and maybe she is. I don't think we have very much chance if we stick with what we got, and maybe the alternative won't be that good, but maybe it will be. I mean, maybe she'll grow into it. American history is kind of replete with examples of people who grew into something. I don't know, but I'm for anything. I mean, I think the country is in desperate straits, and we're in trouble here. Promise you, we got to do something different. I don't know.
Boy, we sure do. I had someone asked me yesterday, could she be as good a president as Joe Biden or handle it as well? That's a tall order. I don't know. One thing I do know, if she was elected, she'd be a hell of a lot better than Donald Trump. That's a slam dunk. I just, friend Kathleen Ballou sent it to me, something called Raw Story, which I guess is a very progressive outlet, but
it is.
They've had some good stuff in there, and they had a story about a guy named Ivan Raiklin, retired Army reservist, says he was a former DIA. He is a self-declared secretary of retribution in a Trump term, and they have targeted 350 Democrats, January 6th Capitol Police, and the media to go after immediately. Now, normally you'd just brush aside story like that. It happens during campaigns and everything. You don't brush aside that kind of a story, a secretary of retribution for Donald Trump, because that's who he is. That's what he's all about. And I just think all of these Democrats have to understand this is not having a Mitt Romney or a John McCain or a Bob Dole as the alternative. You might not like that. You might not like some of the policies. This is cliche, but it's an existential threat to America.
So Raw Story, I know well. They're one of the better, long time, I guess for lack of a better thing, left of center aggregators. And you can always find stories that you like on there. In its 20-year history, I don't think ever written an editorial. It wrote one to say that Biden should get out. and when I tell you, don't confuse this with Town Hall or Fox. I think they're reputable, but they definitely their politics have definitely left of center, and the things that they link to are not made up. They're real people with a real site. I know them well. I don't know them personally, but I know that I read their site every day.
Well, I think that's good to hear. I mean, Jamie Raskin also said that this story about having a secretary of retribution in any Trump administration was very credible. Called on Mike Johnson and others to disown it. We're going to be waiting a long time for that. It's just one illustration of the threat. I mean, the incredible threat. People say we got through 4 years of Trump. Hell, he didn't know what he was doing when he got to Pennsylvania Avenue in 2017. He now knows. He now knows how to surround himself with people who only care about him and not the country or the Constitution. It would be awful beyond description.
That it would be. After a long day, you're going to love getting a good night's sleep with Miracle Made. This helps a lot because your body is in full contact with the sheets, you're covered with them, and this is an important contributing factor to getting what's really important. That's a good night's sleep. Is.
With heat waves hitting the country, it's so important to sleep under cool, clean, Miracle sheets after a long, sweaty day. Sleeping at the right temperature is a critical way to feel rested the next day. Now, if you wake up too hot or too cold, we highly recommend you check out Miracle Made's bed sheets. Miracle Made sheets are inspired by NASA and use silver-infused thermoregulating fabrics so you can sleep at the perfect temperature all night long, no matter what the weather is like outside. Plus, the silver lining prevents 99.7% of bacterial growth, which means Miracle sheets require 3 times less laundry because they stay clean and fresh 3 times longer. Your bed will feel freshly made every night. So stop sleeping on bacteria that can clog your pores and cause breakouts and acne. Sleep clean with Miracle instead. Trust us, with no more gross odors, life is a whole lot better for your household. The NASA-inspired temperature-regulating silver-infused fabrics truly give you maximum comfort in any weather, and they make pillowcases and comforters too. Join us in getting better sleep every night. Not only are Miracle sheets luxuriously comfortable, they don't have the high price tags of other luxury brands. Miracle sheets feel nicer than bed sheets used by some 5-star hotels. So it's a vacation every time you get into bed. I usually picture myself in Nassau or Bermuda, but it's your call. Go to trymiracle.com/warroom to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo War Room at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product that it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So that means if you're not 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/warroom and use the code WARROOM to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/warroom to treat yourself. So thank you, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode. Look for the link in our show notes. Now, James, if there's anyone who can make sense of the crazy quilt pattern of European elections, it's Ed Luce, columnist and chief American correspondent for the Financial Times, who has covered the whole globe in his many years of experience. Ed, we used to look to Europe as a harbinger of what may come to American politics. To put it mildly, that picture is pretty hazy today. The far right scored big victories in Spain and Germany. The far left did much better than expected in France, staving off the right. Centrists did well in Poland, and the center left overwhelmed the Tories in Great Britain. Other than a general anti-incumbency, would you please tell me a pattern here?
I wish there were a pattern. I think the human mind tries to seek patterns sometimes where none exists. I mean, I do think that the last bit of your question has some truth to it, though. There is a strong anti-politics and anti-incumbency, therefore, feeling all over the democratic world, and I think in the undemocratic world too. And therefore, there is a certain randomness to some of these results. I don't think that Joe Biden can look at the British election result and think, okay, we've got a wave coming here that is going to reject right-wing populism once and for all. And I don't think, he can draw the same conclusions from the very bespoke French electoral system's ability to organize, tactically vote, and keep out the far right. I think these are stories that make sense in the British context and in the French context. The only quibble I'd have with your question, Al, is about Germany. I don't think the AfD did that well in the European elections. They got less than 20%. They didn't increase their vote share from the previous one. And although that is an alarmingly high number, particularly when it comes to Germany, it wasn't a surge of any kind. The only sort of places you can really see the far right holding really good shares are Italy, Hungary, and to some extent Austria. And
How
again,
about the
each of
Netherlands?
those have their own stories.
Yeah, they did pretty well in the Netherlands too. But
True.
let's.
True.
I want to pick up on France. You really are aware of that. I mean, the good news was that Marine Le Pen's right-wing party, pro-Putin, the French version of Hungary's Orban, they were expected to win. All the experts told us that. Yet they ran, a distant third. And Macron and the left-wing parties, as you said, really shrewdly and strategically worked to achieve that electoral result. But what now? Can Macron stitch together a workable coalition? Can he govern?
It's a very good question. I mean, I do want to emphasize the point you've just underlined that, having that kind of organization to defeat the far right meant that in hundreds of districts, of constituencies, the party that came third to the far right stepped down in favor to the party that came second. And that involves sometimes, people with neo-communist affiliations stepping down in favor of somebody with neoliberal ones, or vice versa. That's quite a degree of cooperation and prioritizing, of understanding that you need a cordon sanitaire around these people. They are unhygienic. They are extreme. So I think Macron does not want the far left to be leading the new government. That you get the horseshoe effect in France. Once you get to people like Mélenchon, the Samese party leader, the sort of reconstructed old-fashioned socialist, he's pretty pro-Russian. He's pretty anti-EU. He's got some of the he's not a racist, but he's got some of the other problems that you associate with Marine Le Pen. So Macron's going to have to really try and thread a needle here. And I know he's got a very high estimate of his own abilities, but I think even in this instance, he might find that his abilities aren't enough to meet the challenge of getting a centrist government in place. So we're looking at sort of Fourth Republic style uncertainty and chaos potentially in France for quite a while.
Well, let's talk about your homeland. It was the biggest labor win in 30 years, and a sound and a really deserving rejection of the Tories' long rule. But boy, the challenges really for Keir Starmer are huge. Sluggish economy, high poverty, struggling healthcare system, continuing ill effects of Brexit. What do you think? Well, first of all, what do you think of his initial appointments, and what do you think he can achieve?
It's a really unusual situation. I mean, Labour has 2/3 of the seats in the House of Commons. That just never happens. The 335 out of 650 members of parliament have never sat in parliament before. That's a first in British history, that the majority of MPs are first time. It reached such an extent that my 21-year-old goddaughter ran for the Labour Party in North Essex, a hugely safe Tory seat, and against a right-wing Tory called Badenoch. And she cut her majority from 27,000 to 2,000. I have to say I was somewhat relieved because she's 21 and, she's still a child. So I'm glad she's not one of those new members of parliament. But
I would feel better if there was a Luce in parliament. I really would.
Well, she's a goddaughter, not a daughter. But
okay,
yes,
all right.
She would be an honorary Luce in my book. But he's made good appointments. One of the features of the outgoing Tory government is that they kept shuffling portfolios. So you had like 11 chancellors of the Exchequer in 14 years and 12 attorney generals and 15 health ministers. Ministers did not have time to figure out what their job was before they were shuffled because people like Boris Johnson didn't give a damn about substance, didn't give a damn about ministers getting to grips with their portfolios. Starmer has appointed people who understand, for the most part, the jobs they've been given and have a past history with them, which implies a competence level. It implies an experience test that we're having to get accustomed to all over again in Britain. It's just not been the recent trend. Brexit happened almost 8 years ago to the day. So from Brexit to Regrexit in 8 years, the populist cycle has exhausted itself. This is an extraordinary opportunity to make sure it doesn't come back, but you've got to have growth. You can't do social democracy on 1% growth. You need like 2.5%. And so that has to be the overwhelming priority. And it's a very, very difficult challenge.
Yeah, and let me ask one more and turn over to James. NATO is celebrating its 75th anniversary in Washington this week. We can talk about that in a moment, but what impact do these, taken as a whole, these European elections, have on NATO and support for Ukraine?
I don't think much. I think that it's the American election that will have the impact on NATO. The Germans have had a very small defense budget increase, and their very talented defense minister, Boris Pistorius. He complained about that. I used to think the worst job in the world was German defense minister. He's actually turned it into quite a good job. But Britain has got a new government that's pledged to hit 2.5% of GDP spending, which is a fifth higher than the 2% pledge. So there are little stories within wheels there, but the real story is what happens on November the 5th. Do we get a pro-NATO US president again, or do we get one whose contempt for NATO or for many members of NATO is not even disguised? That's the really big question.
Perfect segue to James Carville.
Thank you, Ed. Did you call them unhygienic? Is that the term you used? That means they stink, doesn't it? They don't smell good. That's okay. I wanted to clear it up. So all right. I generally follow European politics. Fairly close, but I was distracted by the events in American politics. Because I didn't see it coming. Did anybody see that Le Pen would do so poorly in the French elections? Because when it first came up on the computer, I'm like, is this really true? Were there any betting lines, or were there any people that said, watch out, she could run third?
I think that people underestimated the degree of tactical cooperation, because in a two-stage voting system, I think that its merits were really advertised in the last couple of weeks. A two-stage voting system, you do your first vote generally as a protest vote. This is what I really feel. This is where my anger lies. And then you have a week or 2 weeks to decide, well, what kind of actual government would I like? And so you get your, sort of emotion, your reptilian brain out of the way in the first round. In the second round, you get to think and cool off. It was, if you'd had the first round of the French election in the British system, Marine Le Pen would now be prime minister. And she'd have a clear majority. It wouldn't be quite the size of the Labour majority, but she'd have a clear majority. But that didn't happen because everybody else, as has happened before in French politics, decided, no, these people are just too extreme. We've got to hold our noses and cooperate with people we genuinely hate, like communists or vice versa, neoliberals.
So Ed, I've read a lot about Brexit, 8 years later, and there is no doubt that it had a negative effect on the economy of the UK. Some people say it's greater than others, but no one that I read says anything other than it's how negative it was. How do they get out of this trap? Can they do things that at least move you closer to where we were before Brexit? Or I'm guessing there'll be another vote. I mean, what is the new prime minister going to do? Or what's the parliament going to do? Because this shit didn't work.
Work is an understatement, I think. Keir Starmer felt nervous about challenging the status quo, so sort of protective of his coming election victory that he went too far, I think, and told my newspaper, the Financial Times, 2 days before the election, that he didn't just rule out rejoining the European Union in the next parliament, meaning the next 5 years. He ruled out joining the EU again in his lifetime, which really, really sort of left me slack-jawed, because that was completely unnecessary. And particularly coming from a prime minister, but perhaps because it was coming from a prime minister who is pro-EU, who is known to be pro-EU. Something like only 1 in 10 Brits under the age of 30 voted Conservative. The young are overwhelmingly penalised by the withdrawn opportunities of Brexit. They voted Labour. I mean, some voted Green, some voted Liberal Democrat. They did not vote Conservative. And they did not vote Conservative for a very good reason. They punished the party that stole their future. And that sentiment is going to be with them for decades. And this is why, I'm wary of drawing lessons from elections in Europe to other democracies, including America, because as we know, under 30s in America are drifting towards Trump. They're not majority Trump, but they're a surprisingly massive minority.
So just making an editorial comment before I go to the next question. According to the Pew poll, there are more Republican under 30 identifiers now than Democratic. And we carried that demographic about 24% in 2020. But for God's sake, let's stay the course. But my question is, so you're not going to say we're going to bring the EU back. But are there tools at the new prime minister's disposal and obviously the new parliament that can statutorily bring you closer to where you were before Brexit?
Yeah, I mean, you could rejoin the customs union, which would reduce the horrible paperwork and bureaucracy that is now involved with importing or exporting to the EU. You could, I guess, rejoin the single European market without rejoining the EU, which is a position that Switzerland is in and Norway is in. But that would be a really ironic conclusion to the whole take back control thing, that you join a market, largest market in the world, rejoin it without having any say over its rules. But I mean, it would be good for British prosperity it would be pretty harmful to British pride about the sovereignty that it was supposedly reclaiming. I think more generally, though, what you're going to see is very, I hate to use the word, grown-up conversations between this Labour government and their European counterparts. I mean, it's hard to sort of overstate just how juvenile and tabloid headline chasing and week to week and day to day the last few years have been, with conservative governments believing the more you insult France or Germany or whoever it is, or Brussels, that you might get a little bit of a bump in the polls back home. And that's caused so much bad blood between Britain and its main partners. That's going to end. That's over now. And I think that, it's hard to measure the upside to that, but that's definitely a good thing, that we do have a stable, predictable, relatively competent, or at least well-intentioned government in Britain. It's an odd sort of novelty feeling for me, because Britain has been the generator of pantomime shows of just sort of laughter. It's become kind of a punchline in the democratic West, and now it isn't.
Well, I think your wife is Irish, and I go to our family there, and they complain about the British. I said, don't complain about them. Try to help them. You're more prosperous than they are. Forget the history. Live in a bracket. You're doing pretty well. They blew themselves up. Albert, go ahead.
You talked to a number of European officials, both your country and on the continent. What are they saying privately about Joe Biden?
They all think that he's going to lose. I mean, to be fair, they thought that for a while, but they're a bit like, the typical Washington cocktail party. They'll say one thing in private and quite another in public until recently. I think with a better excuse if you're a foreign government. So they think Trump's on course to win, and possibly to win big, and that terrifies them.
What do they expect of Trump? Do they think it will be different than the first Trump term? Do they fear
They
that?
think it will be. They think it will be Trump without the adults. They think it will be Trump who wants to strike a deal over Ukraine very quickly. And that he's not that interested in Europe. I mean, the least bad is that he's just not that interested in Europe, and he will focus entirely on China. I don't know how right they are on that. Frankly, I don't have much confidence of what Trump thinks about China. One day he wants TikTok banned, and the next day, when there's a financial incentive pointing the other way, he wants TikTok, to do well. So he's a bit unpredictable on China, but he's very, very predictable for decades on Europe. He doesn't like Europe. And this time he wouldn't be the dog that caught the car. He would be prepared in Trumpian terms, at least, for the presidency, and he would have people who believe in Trumpianism. And therefore he would be able to act out his decades-old dislike of continental Europe, in tangible, damaging policies that I think would, in their view, in the view of so many people I've talked to, basically bring the transatlantic era to an end.
Well, we have seen over the years some European officials become really important world leaders. Tony Blair for a short while, Angela Merkel, certainly. Is there any potential European leader as a counter to Trump?
No, not at the moment. I mean, the one who's riding strong is Meloni, and of course she is basically the Italian version of Trump. She's been a fairly much more moderate than people feared, because Italy, isn't giving that much money to the Ukrainian effort, and therefore, she's at least giving rhetorical support to the Biden administration's stance on Ukraine. I have no doubt she would turn on a dime on November the 6th. If Trump came back to office. So you have to really look, if you want somebody who would be a counterpoint to Trump, to Keir Starmer, who of course is outside of the European Union. But, Britain's a pragmatic place, whichever party is in power. And Labour might dislike Trumpism, but Britain can't really, afford to go to war. I mean, at least rhetorical war with a right-wing populist in America when it's not a member of the EU. It cannot pick fights with both.
James?
So this I know, of course, you can't print it and get it confirmed, but Rishi Sunak told a very reputable person that excuse me, I apologize deeply, that Biden introduced himself 3 different times at one event, which and that story is true, and as if you needed more information about the president's cognitive state. But I just thought I'd tell you that piece of high-end gossip that I heard, and I think it's factual. I don't think it's gossip. How do you, before we let you go, Ed, because you know a lot of this, how do you think the Chinese are viewing all of this? Do you think they?
I think, Xi Jinping wants a period of predictability. The more aggressive sort of China's coming out party, geopolitical assertive China is being put on ice for a while. He needs growth. He's got his own legitimacy problems. There is essentially stagnation in the Chinese system. Young people can't afford to buy an apartment. They can't afford to have children, even though they're now being told to have children, after decades of being told the opposite. He needs growth. There's a lot of fragility behind the dogmatism and one-party rule of Xi Jinping. And I think foreign misadventures is not right now on the Chinese menu. That will probably come back. But I suspect they'd be quite happy with a re-elected Biden, to be honest, because it's more predictable. Or a re-elected Democrat. Trump is just so hard to forecast vis-a-vis China. He really could be anything from an uber hawk to a corrupt president who can be bought off, with some family deal that the Trump sons get delivered to them, or that Ivanka gets. You just don't know with Trump and China. It's very hard to predict.
Well, I'll turn back to after one question, but I always really, really thank you. And the message I'm hearing from the United States, from the United Kingdom, from China, young people are not in a good mood around the world, nor should they be. Old people have stolen everything from them. But at any rate,
nor should they be.
Yeah, that's
nor
what I'm
should
saying.
they be.
Nor should they be. Yeah.
That's
Albert, thank you so much, Ed.
Well, Ed, you gave us in 20 minutes a great world tour. It's not very. It's a bit depressing. Let's hope November 5 somehow doesn't end up more depressing. But if you want to find out about England, go ahead, Ed.
I'm on a podcast with 2 men in their 70s whose minds are very, very sharp, and will doubtless be sharp when you're advancing deep into your 80s. So age is not the factor here; it's ability right now.
Amen. But Ed, you are one of your as James said, you're our most frequent guest, I think, over the years, and certainly no one's better. And we can't thank you enough. And get a little bit of rest and relaxation in that beautiful countryside over there. Okay.
I do have a beer in my hand. Thanks so much. A real pleasure to be on.
And I just want to add that as soon as your Brzezinski book comes out, you have an invitation to join us.
You're too kind. I will accept it for sure.
Thank you, man. Protect yourself and your loved ones online with ExpressVPN.
What we do on the internet is our business. And how important is keeping our data away from big tech and others, James Carville?
Well, ask yourself, you want them to sell all your stuff? You want them to know your secrets? You want them to know what your conversation you're having with your family or your friends or whatever else? Then fine. But if you're a person that likes some degree of privacy, this is about the least expensive and best way to go about to achieve that. I can't think of anything more effective for less money than this.
Absolutely. When you're searching the internet, incognito mode is not enough to hide your browsing history. Check the fine print. All your online activity is 100% visible to tons of third parties, unless you use ExpressVPN. Without it, third parties can still see every website you visit, even in incognito mode. That means your internet service provider, your mobile carrier, and the administration of your Wi-Fi network, like business you visit or a family member, can see everything you're doing. That's why you need ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN reroutes 100% of your traffic through secure, encrypted servers so third parties can't see your browsing history. It does this by hiding your IP address, making it extremely difficult for third parties and malicious actors to track your online activity. And it's super, super easy to use. James and I can attest to that. James and I had no problem firing it up right away. All you need to do is open the app and click one button and get protected. Even better, ExpressVPN works on all your devices, including phones, laptops, tablets, and more, so you can stay private and protected on the go. It's no surprise that ExpressVPN is rated #1 by top tech reviewers like CNET and The Verge. We're thankful we have ExpressVPN when you're on the road. James and I have spent a lifetime working out of hotels, strange offices, and other businesses. And now all it takes is one click to keep them out of our business. Whether it's research, accessing important accounts, or handling sensitive information, we feel so much better knowing our data is protected. We've gotten our families using it too, and it's great knowing your kids and grandkids are protected right along with you. We know you'll feel the same way. So protect your online privacy today by visiting expressvpn.com/warroom. That's expressvpn.com/warroom. And you can get an extra 3 months free. Again, expressvpn.com/warroom. You also can find the link in our show notes. Hey, James, stop me if I'm being too repetitious, redundant, whatever, about the House Republican clown show investigators, Jim Jordan and James Comer. After a year and a half, they've come up with nothing except high levels of demagoguery and sham charges. They aren't serious. Comer has a new one this week. He wants to call up President Biden's physician to question his assessment of the president's mental health. Never mind the doctor-patient privilege. Comer probably doesn't understand that. He just wants to try to once again smear the White House. Now, if he is really interested, hope you hear this, Congressman Comer, in exploring possible malpractice, especially at the White House, you could call your Republican colleague, Congressman Ronnie Jackson, who was an earlier White House physician when he was a Rear Admiral. He was denied an appointment as head of the Veterans Department for inappropriate behavior. Later, the Pentagon's Inspector General reported, quote, substantiated allegations, end quote, that as White House physician, this was during the Trump years, he was boozing on the job, freely dispensing medications, they called him the candy man, and was abusive to staff. He was demoted to captain. Now, this is a man, this is Congressman Dr. Jackson, no knowledge or anything, comments on Biden's medical condition. So I'll tell you, Mr. Comer, if you really are worried about medical malfeasance, you can investigate a guy who's right next door, Ronnie Jackson.
Well, of course, you're right. He was running a pill mill. I think he was running a pill mill even in Obama administration. But whatever, he's become a crank congressman from Amarillo. And, boy, how'd you like to be, have a heart attack and look up and see that treating you? I don't know what the hell you do. My rage is, all right, so Josh Hawley says he just comes out and says, I'm for Christian nationalism. Mike Johnson's for Christian nationalism, and I'm outraged about that. What I'm really outraged about is how few people know exactly what Christian nationalism is, and how few people know how it violates everything about the founder of this country. They have some fake historian named David Barton. And so what I propose we do on this show is get a real historian who can explain the foundational aspect of the United States and its Constitution and start educating people, because we don't do that. They are just running this bias. Trump don't give a shit. He don't know Christian nationalism from Project 25 or any of that shit. They just gonna do all of that, and people don't know. So I propose that in the coming weeks we get a real historian with real good communication skills. Somehow or another, the name Sean Wilentz comes to my mind, and lay out to our listeners exactly why this is not only a god-awful idea, but why it violates everything that the founding of the United States is about. You know,
That's a great. It's always wonderful to talk to Sean Wilentz, but this is really an appropriate topic.
I so too.
I mean, he's good on everything, but he's really good on stuff like this.
He is, and our our viewers, our listeners have influence, and they need to demand that we do more stories on this. And we just people don't know, and we got to tell ourselves, to the extent that we have a 1%, maybe I'm exaggerating, influence on something, we got to exercise it. By the way, we're doing that 92nd Street Y, and boy, maybe there's a way we can bring some more attention to this. I don't know, but I have. A, it's horrible, but B, people don't know what it's not. Well, shit, I'm a Christian, I'm a patriot. Why not be a Christian nationalist?
Yeah, that's a great idea for a topic there. Yeah. No question, James.
Right, and we're actually two Christians, so that gives us some, but we can really talk about it.
Yeah, I think we're sort of nationalists in our own peculiar way, James. I just saw this, and I don't usually cite movie actors on politics, but George Clooney just said, been a big Biden person, that he was just with Joe Biden, and he said that wasn't the Joe big fucking deal of 2010. He wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2020. He was the same man we all witnessed at the debate. That's what Clooney said about just being with him recently.
Well, of course, I know George, and they dropped that at that. Okay, get over it. He's 100% right. I know that he expressed these same sentiments before, but kudos to him, he came out and said it publicly. It don't make a shit what you tell the person next door to you. It makes a shit when you're George Clooney what you say publicly, and thank you, George Clooney.
Amen. When you need your sleep, how great does it feel nodding off after a delicious cup of Beam Dream, James?
Oh, man, can I tell you, as we've said on this show 1,000 times, the most determinative thing in how you feel the next day is how you slept the night before. And this stuff is tasty, it's relaxing, it I don't know what other qualities it has, but it just helps me and everybody I talk to. It helps them get a good night's sleep. Why would you leave any tool in your tool bag to get a good 7.5 hours? I have no idea. And this is a good tool.
Yeah, sure is. Because, as you say, sleep is the foundation of our mental and physical health. When you sleep well, you perform at your best, mentally and physically. Proper sleep can also increase focus, boost energy, and improve your mood, which we need these days, James. Introducing Beam's Dream Powder, a science-backed, healthy hot cocoa for sleep. Dream is a game changer for sleep. Politics can be stressful, and it was horrible watching the hours tick by until the alarm went off. Now, it's great to know it takes one delicious cup of Beam before going to bed, and you'll be sleeping great, ready for the day ahead. And our listeners today get a special discount on Beam's Dream Powder. Their science-backed, healthy hot cocoa for sleep with no added sugar. Better sleep has never tasted better. There are tons of delicious flavors like chocolate peanut butter, oh yes, cinnamon, cocoa, and sea salt caramel. They're only 15 calories with 0 grams of sugar. And you can't get, just can't get enough of that chocolate peanut butter. It's always a treat, and now wanting better sleep no longer keeps you up at night. Other sleep aids can cause next day grogginess, but Dream contains all powerful, all natural blend of reishi extract, magnesium, melatonin, and nano CBD to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. Dream works fast, and the numbers don't lie. In a clinical study, 93% of participants reported Dream helped them get better sleep. Those are pretty good odds, James.
I take them. I tell you, and I like better odds. Anything I can do, like I'm a gambler, and anything you can do to get that edge, you do. And I'd pay a lot of money to know I've got a good night's sleep every night.
And
this is
you'd
part
take
of it.
those odds for LSU, I know, any day.
There you go.
Beam Dream is easy to add to your nighttime routine. Just mix Dream into hot water or milk, froth, and enjoy before bedtime. You'll find out why Forbes and the New York Times are all talking about Beam and why it's trusted by the world's top athletes and business professionals. Now, if you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/warroom and use the code WARROOM at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/warroom and use the code WARROOM for up to 40% off. Now, you also can find the link in our show notes. Now for our listener questions, which we love. Julie, a lot of questions, territory we've covered about Biden. There'll be a few here, but let's try to have as much new stuff as we can. Julie in Jacksonville, Florida, says, I'm told Kamala is the only replacement candidate allowed to access that campaign war chest should Biden step aside. Is that true? And if it goes to another nominee, what happens to all that money?
What I think happens, and I read this, but I think it's right. If it is Harris, for whatever Kirk, she would take the money over. If they nominate someone other, the money goes to the party. If the money goes to the party, because the candidate's got to raise money for the party and the campaign, that wouldn't, to me, be a determinative factor. But our listener, to the extent that I know this, is correct. It would go directly to Harris's campaign. If it was someone else, it would go to the party coffers.
Yeah, that's what I have been told also.
Right.
Now we're going to say over across the pond, Graham in Dublin, Ireland, wants to know if Admiral McRaven would be a potential running mate with Kamala Harris if Biden were to bow out. Somebody else, another questioner, asked about Liz Cheney. Graham, I think Liz Cheney's been a great profile and courage. That's not going to happen. I'm a huge admirer of Admiral McRaven, who I've only met once. He had a incredibly distinguished military career. He was in charge of the Osama bin Laden operation, Chancellor of the University of Texas. But I'm very leery of choosing someone who's never faced voters. We've done it twice. One time it worked out very well with Dwight Eisenhower. Of course, he had been the Supreme Allied Commander and knew a little bit about politics. The other time with Donald Trump, it was a disaster. Admiral McRaven is no Donald Trump. He's an incredibly admirable, qualified man. But I think that if that scenario should occur, Harris is much more likely to pick an elected official, hopefully a governor.
Look, if she wanted to pick a former military leader, Admiral McRaven is obviously one of the great sailors of all time. But I think Admiral Stavridis would, although he's never run for office, he was, head of NATO. I think he's got, right back. Ravens at the University of Texas. That'd be great. I think Admiral Stavridis is pretty media savvy and pretty much knows how to work with different kinds of people. But I think both of them are patriotic, brave, and able Americans, and they should be considered.
Hey, James, all politics is local, and I think the world of Admiral Stavridis, as you do. If he should be chosen, will he still come on our show, which he's done frequently?
No. Maybe these admirals sometimes they remember the guys below deck.
Right, that's us. Ian in northern New Mexico says, "What does the donor class expect in a Trump Project 2025 world? Are they all going to flee the country?"
Okay, this is something that I do know something about, and I'm missing a call with 80 donors right now because this is more important. The donor class of the Democratic Party is literally in revolt. And I don't mean 2/3 of them or 3/4 of them. I mean like 85, 90% of them. And, there are not that many of them. And they are the most unhappy campers that you can imagine. I promise you that. This is something that I spent a lot of time on Zoom calls with donors, and that they're a decidedly unhappy bunch. And by the way, they publicly expressed it. I mean, I'm big donor class at Abigail Disney. Can you be a Barry Diller, Ari Emanuel? I mean, it's just one after the other. And I could tell you names that you would have heard of, but I'm not going to do that because I don't have permission from these people to use their names. But you can rest assured that these people are not happy and they are expressing their displeasure.
Yes, as they should. Pete in Raleigh, North Carolina says, "How did Biden's people even let him on camera if he was so exhausted, overprepared, and sick?" And he also wants to know, where was anyone's criticism of Trump's performance? To take the latter first, there was criticism. I mean, Trump told one lie after another, but it was overwhelmed by that just incredible picture of a pathetic, doddering president of the United States. And I think it's hard to to counter that. I think if it had been a normal debate, Trump would have gotten raked over the coals for all those lies, and he has to some extent. But the Biden picture dominated. I think, James, we agree. Somebody later, maybe it'll be an Evan Osno. Someone is going to write the definitive work on Biden 2024, and we're going to find out what were they thinking, and was there any reservation, and why did it happen?
So let me expand on this a little bit. First, what people look for or talk about is a surprise. That Trump went up there and told one fucking lie after another, made shit up, didn't know what he was talking about, was 100% expected. And he met expectations. He sat there and lied time after time after time. But what was hoped for, but feared, was Biden would have a total brain fart. Well, guess what? Biden had a total brain fart. And that's always going to be the news. Now, one of the things, and maybe Evan also, there are going to be 50 books written on this. And I'm just warning everybody, I would so be for Vice President Harris if she was a nominee, but the question she's going to get is the Howard Baker question. What did you know and when did you know it? You were in these meetings. And what you're going to find is going to leak out and continue to leak out that there were concerns, people were meeting, in small offices. They're going to tell stories of she being in a meeting and Biden, introduced himself to somebody 5 times. All of this is going to happen. It cannot be avoided. It can only be prepared for. And when I tell people that, they say, "Oh, we got a lot more stuff to worry about." You do, but this ain't going anywhere. The whole, every time you go back, you pull the curtain back a little bit, you see people that knew, that were concerned, and that they went along with this because, what the hell? He's the president, man. We can't say anything, but she is not going to get a free pass on this.
James, Linda in Bremerton, Washington, asked a simple question: where can I make a difference in the Senate contest this fall?
By sending a contribution to Senator Patty Murray. Is she in any danger of losing? Of course she's not. But she spoke up on the critical issue today, and she has an account that she gives to other senators. I promise you. I salute Senator Murray, and I salute my dear friend Senator Michael Bennet and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. When people like that stand up and speak out on behalf of the United States, they should be given credit and contributions, whether they're from Washington State or Rhode Island or Colorado or anywhere else. That's my firm view.
I think that makes sense. David in Hahira, Georgia, asked, should Justices Sonia Sotomayor, 70 years of age, and Elena Kagan, 64, be encouraged by Democrats to retire before November so Biden in a Democrat majority Senate can replace them with intelligent, reasonable, Democratic-leaning justices who can serve decades longer? No, I don't think that's realistic, David. I really don't. Certainly, Ginsburg should have retired in 2014. People knew her health was failing then. I don't think we know that about either of those. Certainly not Kagan. And I just think that's premature at this stage.
Yeah, Kagan, I agree. Sotomayor, I've read more than once, don't know, that she has diabetes. Well, there's diabetes and there's diabetes. And I don't know, I do know I've read it. I don't know how advanced a case she has, but diabetes has a shall we say, negative effect on longevity. It ain't no shit you want. And so I have an open mind about sort of a year, but you don't want to go down as the next Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That lady had a stunning judicial career, stunning opinions, and unfortunately, and I can't believe that the Biden family is not looking at this. That her comma is, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, comma, the justice who held on too long, comma, all right? That's what she's going to be remembered by. That there's a lesson here. Listen to it. Pay attention to it.
Yeah, there sure is. Our final question is from Carrie in Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey. She wonders if Kamala Harris can win. She says, I love her. I wanted her to be our nominee in 20, but didn't Hillary Clinton teach us that, unfortunately, we live in a nation that is still not comfortable with a woman in the Oval Office? James.
Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. I know that. And I know that I can revisit this history 1,000 times. I'm sure there's some reluctance. I wouldn't necessarily take that lesson away. And it all depends on her performance. And the question we don't know is she up to this? I would take her in a New York second. I don't know how fast. I don't know why New York second is fast. I don't know. A Phoenix second, but it is. It's at least with her, I think we got somewhat of a chance.
Yeah, that's it.
Offering nothing, we don't.
We're
have
in the
any
ball
chance.
game.
It's
up to her.
We have a less. Let me say a less chance. I never want to say any, because the country does. One thing everybody listen to this show. I promise this is true. The country does not want to vote MAGA.
No,
they just don't.
No,
they don't.
The vast majority of Americans don't want Joe Biden or Donald Trump to be in the Oval Office next January.
Correct. And that's not our opinion. That is a fact.
Just give them an alternative and hopefully she's better.
Yeah, give them an alternative. Give Vox Populi. Give the people what
If we
want.
didn't get to your questions this week, please resend them because it's really hard to pick them. They're all so good. Thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. Don't forget to send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show at Politicon. Now, following this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you'd check out the links to our sponsors, Miracle Made, ExpressVPN, and Beam, and our episode show notes. We thank you for supporting them because when you do, you help make this podcast happen. To keep up with us, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And check out our Substack at politicswarroom.com. James and I are constantly adding new content. We got a lot to talk about these days, so go ahead, take a look. You can also find other shows you might enjoy in the Politicon YouTube channel or when you search Politicon on your favorite podcast sites. Remember, please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our War Room planning.